Good afternoon and happy Independence Day. I really don't like using hey happy Fourth of July is doesn't mean as much as Independence Day. So I always say happy Independence Day. So I hope yours was nice. I hope you enjoyed any barbecues, anything you endeavored today, taking special ways to celebrate, and just remember how those freedoms got to you, okay? It was because of our founding fathers putting their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the line. Uh, all 56 signers. Anyway, that's what we're going to talk about today. Uh, this is usually Dave's Dugout, and it still is, but on Wednesdays, I usually use it for Spirit of America, as I call it. And we talk about the signing of the Declaration of Independence. But because it is Independence Day, I decided, let's have a little special broadcast. So my podcast today will be just a little bit more on the signing. Okay, so let's get right to it. A couple weeks before the Second Continental Congress met on June 28th of 1776, a committee of five was appointed to write the Declaration of Independence. It was Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. Those five, they were delegates from the colonies, and they were set forth to write the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson actually penned it. He actually wrote it, but these four others kind of oversaw it and made any amendments that they saw was necessary. And one large amendment was they took out slavery, even though they were slave holders, most of them, and not all of them, but most of them, and but they needed the South. They needed some the votes from the South, which was Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia, to make it unanimous. They had seven colonies out of the 13 that were ready to vote yes, but six of them were still more or less saying no. And those four, along with Pennsylvania and New York, and I think New Jersey was another one. So it wasn't really the whole four in the South. But anyway, they were withholding their vote, so they wanted to make sure they got a unanimous consent. So they omitted the part about freeing the slaves. So it was needed because otherwise they wouldn't have got to unanimous consent. And if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it says by unanimous decision or unanimous consent of the 13 colonies. So it was unanimous. All 13 colonies voted yes. Now, it took they were debating. I mentioned this prior, but I'm going to mention it again. There was a lot of debate. There was a lot of meetings in secret corners, probably, of Independence Hall. Independence Hall was kind of dark because the windows were all pulled shut, so nobody could hear. The drapes were pulled. The only it's a two-story building, basically a three-story building, but the second story was windows. So you had light coming in from the windows, and they were shut also. So there was no circulating air there, and it was hot and humid, basically like it is today. So and they met. They met on the 28th, 29th, 30th, and the 1st, and they voted. Okay, they finally came to a vote. Benjamin Franklin was one who basically stood his ground and was one of the most boisterous, I would say, probably because he was an elder statesman. He was the oldest of the 56 signers, by the way. Benjamin Franklin was 71. He was the oldest, and he made many trips across the ocean to try to bargain with the King George III and his constituents to no avail. But so he was the oldest signer, and he had probably the most vocal when he stood up and said what he needed to. He said sometimes. I'm sure it became pretty quiet in there, and they listened. But it took some time. It took some time. So uh, and they voted, and again it was voted, and then on the second was when they actually took the vote and it passed, and then the Declaration of Independence was adopted. However, because it took some time to rewrite it, uh, and it was signed prior to that by John Hancock and Robert Thurston, the only two that signed it, and Robert never signed it, the official Declaration of Independence that was submitted on the 4th. So, uh, therefore, it was signed and it was submitted, and then it was declared on the 4th. Okay. Now, on the 4th, there was still only two signers, but they had to get the paper out. And so they got the paper out. They went out and they said, by the way, I found out I did some searching, and the little boy that I said was at the door, and the bellmen, they weren't really there. Okay, nobody, no little boy was there, and that was a fictional thing that was added probably many many years later by somebody who wrote a book, and he put that in there, and it was kind of thought that it was true, but it really wasn't. Okay, there was no ringing in the bell. The actual bell, in fact, I'm going to bring this up because it's kind of a neat story. Bear with me a minute, okay? It's kind of a neat story because the bell, the Liberty Bell, now you remember this is the Liberty Bell. This is the bell that was up in the bell tower of Independence Hall, okay? Okay. On this day in 1776, a 2,000-pound bell, now known as the Liberty Bell, is said to have rung out from the tower of the Pennsylvania House, but it was actually on July 8th. Okay? Summoning the citizens to the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence. Now, there's probably maybe some bell ringing, possible hand bells and screaming and yelling when it was finally told that we had the Declaration of Independence. But the actual reading took place on July 8th. Okay? And the doorkeepers of the Assembly of Pennsylvania were the official ringers of the Liberty Bell. One such doorkeeper was William Hurry, who has long received credit for ringing the bell on July 8th, 1776. Hurry was born in Scotland in 1721 and arrived in Pennsylvania sometime in 1741. After running away from home in 1768, he became the first sexton at the Old City Neighbors Old Pine Presbyterian Church, where he was buried. Okay? So, and here we go. Now, you're not going to be able to actually see this because it's in reverse, but it's what's at his tombstone. Very, very unique. Robert Hurry, buried there, and it says what he did. Okay? It says on there 1721 to 1781. So he died in 81. Was the ringer of the bell on July 8th, 1776. Philadelphia chapter such and such. Okay? So that's who the actual first bell ringer was. Now remember, they had printed about maybe 800 copies. That's what has been told anyway. About 800 copies at this printing press. Okay? And it went out by town criers, and it went out to in satchels of horses and went in carriages, and I've started spreading all over because I had to go out of Philadelphia. So it took some time. So I think that was why they picked July 8th. It took about maybe 2 or 3 days for it to get to all the colonies, and they didn't want to announce it prior to that. So those colonies, they finally got the word, and it was by bell criers. Back in those days, town criers. Town criers they would ring a handbell like this, and it would go, "Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye," 3 times usually, really loud. And they had big voices, and everybody would go to their windows or come out of their doors or gather around to hear what the town crier had to say. Okay, and so and he would announce basically the whatever news was out there, and he would announce that the Declaration of Independence had been signed, and we were now independent states, United States of America, from the King of England. Of course, we had to fight for those rights, but we still declared the rights to be independent. Okay, and that's what happened. So now we had 56 signers. Now, everybody may think our founding fathers, those 56, they were probably old men, right? Lots of old men sitting around making decisions. I got news for you. There was only 5. Only 5 of the 56 signers were 60 years old or older. 5. Okay? Benjamin Franklin, the oldest at 71. There was also 4 more that were between 60 and 70. We had 9 between the ages of 50 and 60. We had 18 between the ages of 40 and 50, which is middle age. Okay? 17 were between the ages of 30 and 40. And we actually had 5 signers that were under 30 years old. How about that? 5 signers. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, was only 33 years old. Only 33. And look at what he had to do and how important Thomas Jefferson was when it came to things like this. John Hancock, who signed the original, the big signature John Hancock, so that the King of England could see it without his spectacles on, was 39. 39 years old. Now, this isn't a signer, but we've all heard of Alexander Hamilton, right? Alexander Hamilton, at the time of the signing, was only 20. He was only 20. And look what he became later on in life. Okay? But there you have it. South Carolina, one of our counties from the south, they only had 4 delegates. The oldest with 34. The oldest with 34. One was 30. The other 2 were in their 20s. How young was that? New York had the oldest delegates. New York had the oldest delegates. They had 4 that were, and 3 of them were 50 years old or older. So New York being, and that's where most of the populace was at, was in the state of New York. So that's where a majority of the people who had wealth and that were in New York and in New York City proper. Okay, so that's an interesting fact when you really think about it, that these were not old people at all. In fact, what I just mentioned to you, that's 30. That's 40. 40 of the 56 signers were under 40 years old. 50 or under. Okay, absolute, right on the dot, 50 or under. Okay, so very important to realize. Now, there was 27 grievances filed against the King of England. 27. Okay, 27 grievances, and they were pretty important. And some of them were really, really traitorous. But I'm going to read one each week. Okay, maybe 2, but each week I'm going to read one of the grievances, and we're going to start with number 1 today, and that was when it says, when I say he, that's King George III. He has refused to assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. In other words, the laws that he put out were not for the public good. They were for the good of England. And he didn't want to give in. So when they say assent, he wasn't going to give in. And so I'll read that again. He has refused to assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. In 1763, the states of Europe conducted the government in American colonies were materially altered. In other words, 1763 is when King George basically altered for the public good what he thought was good for him. And it was probable these several causes combined engendered these areas of direct and indirect oppression, which finally impelled the colonies to open rebellion. This is when the rebellion basically started. The growing commercial importance of the colonies, rapidly accumulating wealth, and rapid increase of population required new laws to be enacted. These laws weren't any good for the colonies. These natural increments produced the colonies' assemblies made several enactments. They made their own enactments, which commercial operations, colonial currency, colonial representation in the imperial parliament. So they basically had basically set up their own currency. The King of England didn't like this. He didn't like colonial currency. He wanted them to use the pound, the King of England, the English pound. So the growing commercial importance of the colonies and the rapidly, and accumulating, I read that. I'm sorry about that. I lost my place. So then the King of England had wicked ministers that were excited the colonies to a point where they had to be rebellious. They had enough, okay? And it was growing and growing and growing. And then along came the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act is what really upset the colonies more than anything, which resulted in public distrust and problems, and public property was destroyed. Royal authority was defied. The home government, through Secretary Conway, which is the home government was in England, informed the Americans that these things should be overlooked and provided the assemblies. Okay, so I'm sorry, I misunderstood that. Secretary Conway was telling the King of England that the problems that the colonies were doing, the rebellion and all that, should have been overlooked, and make full compensation for all losses that were sustained. He's asking the King of England for the full losses to be made whole. Assemblies complied with, but in Massachusetts, where most of the rebellion was to be made, the legislature and authority and authorized the payment thereof, granted free pardon to all concerned in the rebellions, desiring thus to test the sheer insincerity of the proposition of the crown to forgive the offenders. They're asking the King of England to forgive the offenders, to pardon them. Okay? This act was wholesome and necessary for the public good. That's basically what was written. For it would be produce a quiet and return of confidence in the promises of the king. So they really wanted quietness. They want assurances that everything would be for the public good. But the king and his council disallowed the act and refused to comply. There it was. That's the very first finger pointing, so to speak, at the king. The first of 27. that he was not going to do this. And they're asking for pardon. They're asking for full restitution of all their losses. And there was plenty of property losses. Property was taken. So the Stamp Act was an act to raise taxes. Okay, taxes for the King of England, taxes for England. It was all going overseas. It wasn't going to help the colonies. All right. So that was where it all began. That was the first one, the first of 27, all in the Declaration of Independence. And we're going to cover each one in detail, okay, because they're important. Again, the Declaration of Independence, these 56 signers committed a treasonous act. And there was a bounty. There was a bounty on their heads. And I'm sure the King of England, he wanted John Hancock. I don't think he wanted him killed. I think he wanted him brought to England on trial. They were going to try him, and you know what would have happened. He would have been called, committed an act of treason and hung. Okay, that's what would have happened to John Hancock. So, surprisingly enough, he was never captured that I know of. We'll get a detail on it. So we'll find out more. And this is the first of many stories that you're going to enjoy. I'm going to read a history of each signer, and I'm going to probably two a week, and then we're going to go in depth on these 27 direct causes. Okay, that the King of England is not going to do. So there we go. There we have it. Today, Independence Day. Enjoy it. Watch. There's so much stuff on TV going through the New York Harbor, flyovers, over 40 tall ships. It was just a sight to see, and it's still going on. So, and Washington, D.C., and there's fireworks tonight. Enjoy the fireworks. There's going to be some tremendous fireworks tonight. Washington, D.C. is supposed to have one of the biggest. New York City is probably one of the biggest. Around this area, Bay City, Saginaw, Midland, probably one of the biggest. So enjoy them tonight. And just, even John Adams wrote to his wife, Abigail. He wrote to her and he says, I want this day to be remembered forever and celebrated with shouts of joy and fireworks. He said it in a letter. So there you have it. Have a great day. Enjoy Independence Day. Have a good one. Bye.